We didn't have this problem. We had Mexican marijuana coming through. It's a whole different ballgame now.
If you look at states that have legalized marijuana, you tend to see lower opioid overdose death rates.
National data still links marijuana as an illicit drug. And if you ask about illicit drugs in Colorado, people will not say marijuana because it is not illegal.
My official diagnosis is I have fibromyalgia and ulcerative colitis. You have all these medications that you're taking, and then they do damage in some other area. And so my doctor was like, you are on 3 medications to take care of this problem. Why don't you just try Colorado? Why don't you just try it and see if it helps with pain, if it helps with, because at that point I was starting to have tics and jerking. And he was like, it makes more sense to be on 1 medication than it does to be on all these 3. So I made a leap of faith. I went and stayed with my best friend, tried pain medication, tried the cannabis. The most benefit that I can feel is with the CBD. Immediately, I noticed an effect, and it was working for the first time. There was a day that I had no pain, and I have not had that.
It's really, the cannabidiol is thought to be a lot of the analgesic effect of marijuana and cannabinoid products. So it's the cannabidiol more than the 9-delta tetrahydrocannabinol, the THC. So I think there is legitimate evidence that marijuana and cannabinoids work for chronic pain.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at states that have legalized marijuana, you tend to see lower opioid overdose death rates. And there's evidence even in studies that look at the addition of cannabinoids to people already on opioids, showing improvements in pain relief. So there's legitimate, actually it's probably the single best evidence is for pain, particularly neuropathic pain, if you have pain that's related to nerve dysfunction, that cannabinoids help.
There's a lot of theory and conjecture. Again, we don't have a lot of hard science to support this, but there is some theoretical ideas that the CBD subclass, which is the subclass of a cannabinoid that does not contain the THC, may have some impact in inflammation and may have some impact even in reducing anxiety. It's the THC component that actually creates the anxiety. So
let me stop for a sec. This is interesting to me, and I just learned about this in the last year, that it's not just the THC that's a potentially active ingredient in marijuana. It's also the CBD, which is cannabidiol or something like that.
yes.
And it's having maybe impacts on different parts of the brain. They've done some studies where they grow marijuana without THC in it, and they use that in clinical trials sometimes to try and isolate the effects.
So we know there may be a potential for seizure disorders, and that makes sense considering it hits the basal ganglia in that area and the prefrontal cortex. And there may be an impact, as I mentioned, that with inflammation. But I think the area of real interest will be in cancer research. And there's some animal models that look at certain species might actually reduce tumor cells, and that has a tremendous impact in the future. But again, those are animal models, and we don't really know dosages. We don't know what people should be taking or what they can be taking. We know that it's a great anti-nausea, aspect to it, which is helpful for during chemotherapy. But, from the actual cancer itself, there may be some role in the future.
The first time I smoked, I ate a McDouble. Sir, I ate this McDouble, and it was the best McDouble I have ever eaten in my life.
There's a difference.
Hands down, maybe the best burger I've ever eaten in my life.
There's a difference, though, between flavor and just being super hungry.
And it was delicious. Yeah, I've only been smoking for like 2 years now. I started a month after I graduated, pretty much. And the negative effects, it definitely, at first, when I was smoking, it made me hugely demotivated. Didn't really want to get up and do anything, and I just kind of smoked. But I think I agree, as I built up a tolerance, and it was able to be kind of adjusted into a part of my life where it was more of like that cocktail, at the end of the night.
It's not so physically addictive. I think it's just I like the lifestyle, I like the way it feels, and it's mentally addictive is the only thing.
It can drift into your habits really
Yeah.
easily.
It
And it can just become a part of your daily lifestyle.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't stay there very hard if you just don't feel like it.
I don't know, I've been smoking for 7 years, and the longest tolerance break I've ever had is about a week.
Damn.
And how did you feel during that week?
Basically just couldn't sleep, lots of insomnia. Couldn't really build up an appetite for anything. Didn't feel hungry for days. But other than that, I felt fine.
We are number one in the country in teen marijuana use and in college age marijuana use. And there probably is some impact to the developing brain that we really haven't fully elucidated. And to me, that's the biggest risk. You have a bunch of 15-year-olds running around doing pot. They're using really, really high potency pot that is very different than the pot was around 20 years ago.
I do believe, there are a lot of misconceptions about medical marijuana. How it actually helps people, what it's actually done. In my opinion, it's created a considerable problem for law enforcement, in that it takes an incredible amount of time and resources to enforce, to follow up with these people. It's had an impact on communities where we get most of our complaints are driven by neighbors calling in saying, my neighbor's house next door stinks. I can't sit on my porch in the summer and have a cocktail because it smells like a skunk outside and gives me a headache. That's what we get. We go out to these places and we often talk to the people that complain on these, and they're like, well, I voted for Amendment 64, but I didn't know it was going to be like this, or I wouldn't have voted for it. There was a lot of money put into the campaign for recreational marijuana and for Amendment 64 to pass. And a lot of it was pushed by the marijuana industry, the commercial industry. However, I just think the public was probably underinformed going into that election. And again, it's created incredible problems. Our neighbor states complain about all the marijuana coming out of Colorado. Stops made all over the country where smugglers are taken off with hundreds of pounds of marijuana that's come from Colorado. In the last 6 years, I've seen an instance where we've recovered marijuana that's been grown south of the border in Mexico once. And I know it's coming through the state, but it's not stopping here. And I know I've talked to my counterparts in California, Washington, Oregon, some of the other places that have either recently passed, provisions for recreational marijuana, or that have passed those same measures over the last several years. And law enforcement has experienced the same problem everywhere. What do you do with all of the evidence that you take, all the plants? What do you do? How do the courts deal with these things? It's just created a real glut that I don't know if our law enforcement has been ready for.
People have pointed to crime statistics. There were more homicides in 2015, the year after the recreational marijuana was legalized. But if you look at where those are, a number of them were in Pueblo, and they were related to the heroin trade.
And Pueblo has a horrific problem with opiate deaths. One of the EMTs that I talked to is using Narcan to reverse opiates every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day that he's out. So, I think we don't really know if there is an impact there, or if this was just developing anyway, because it is certainly developing in the rest of the country regarding opiates.
We've seen instances that, that have resulted in some very violent acts. We've had some shootings, we've had robberies, we've had a few homicides involving marijuana since I've been involved with the narcotics section as a supervisor since 2011. So yeah, there's been an upswing in that.
And there's questionnaires we ask patients to fill out that say, do you use alcohol? Do you use illegal drugs? And in Colorado, marijuana is neither of those.
Exactly, and we have to help providers to say, we have to ask about marijuana the same we ask about tobacco and the same we ask about alcohol, because it is legal. And so it is not an illicit drug, and it doesn't carry those stigma comments that illicit or illegal drugs do.
When physicians sign off on a medical marijuana card, it is just saying this person is eligible to buy medical marijuana. It's not saying how they should use it or how it should be prescribed. So I think most patients turn to the web and some of the websites that are out there, and there are quite a number that tell people what they should use and how, but they're of dubious quality.
So this is what the patch looks like. And since this does have 5 milligrams of CBD and THC in it, I'll wind up cutting this in half. And it said that the CBD can counteract the effects of the THC. So if you have a little bit too much THC, then you can counteract that with more CBD. So this is Canatonic Shatter. It's a higher CBD strain versus THC. So I figured I might try this because it's supposed to have less depression side effects and less anxiety side effects.
The problem with vaping, of course, is that some of these cannabis products, particularly the ones, the oils, the hash oils, and the stuff called like shatter and butter, can have upwards of 70% THC. So they're incredibly, incredibly potent. And these drugs don't even really resemble pot any longer when you're talking about those kinds of concentrations. They're almost really like pure psychoactive drugs. And I think there's real concerns we have about the dangers of using something that is that potent in terms of its risk on people's brains and maybe even being more likely to cause dependence.
Those with anxiety, we know that THC in particular in higher amounts can worsen and exacerbate anxiety disorders and can bring on panic attacks in susceptible individuals. Now, not everybody has those susceptibility genes. Not everybody develops those anxiety symptoms. But those that have kind of a genetic predisposition or already have an anxiety disorder are at more risk of developing worsening symptoms. For people that have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, we do know that it can worsen symptoms. And so those are the individuals that we caution, and the same caution we would have with alcohol, that it can worsen symptoms.
It's certainly less dangerous than tobacco for all the health consequences. And so it's hard to argue, yes, you really shouldn't do this stuff because it's maybe dangerous when they can call attention to the fact that it's basically totally normalized now in society. There's 400 something pot stores in this state. There's 300 Starbucks, and we're fighting a losing battle as parents. I think that's like the biggest issue. For my adult patients, though, it's really kind of less of a. I think you have to be a little more measured.
We started that conversation with tobacco, and that's kind of the way I think we need to approach this. Yes, tobacco is certainly legal, but it has tremendous health effects, and that's where we have to come from, more from a public health perspective than a criminal perspective, and I think that's been a positive piece. I think the negative piece is we don't know enough, and we just have all of this THC. We don't know what dosage goes for what. We don't know what could potentially cause an overdose, and that's the part that's the unknown.
You have this natural product that people are making all around you, and it's hard to justify saying, oh, no, you shouldn't use that. You should use a prescription medicine that we can get you, It's sort of it can be duplicitous if people feel like, well, you're just trying to support big pharma because you don't want me to use this drug and then the same ingredients are in this other version of it and it's expensive and you want me to use that instead.
I think we're better off with decriminalization of this substance because people are now more willing to talk to their healthcare providers about their use. And so then we can have some honest conversations with people about their risk. I think the potential for marijuana in healthcare we're just at the beginning of that. And I'd love to see that research blossom. There are potential uses with caveats, with caution, just like everything else.
I don't use the word legalization. I had a friend of mine, he's a doctor in Arizona, and he says, well, it's not legal, it's just regulated. So I always say that.